Ever since I can remember, Star Trek has been a part of my life, due in large part to my father, who is a lifelong Trek fan, and while First Contact is one of my favorite films, its direct sequel, Insurrection, is widely remembered as one of the more forgettable Star Trek films. But ultimately, Insurrection isn't a complete loss, and it's only been until recently that my outlook on the third Next Generation film has begun to evolve. To be clear, Insurrection is by no means a cinematic masterpiece. Its story is somewhat shallow and isn't particularly clever or original. But the strange thing about growing older is the way that certain movies, literature, or pieces of art can come to mean different things to you at different points in your life. Insurrection is one such film for me. The third Next Generation movie is a breezy little Star Trek film that, while not remarkable, is handsome to look at and even gets plenty of laughs out of the Next Generation cast, whose chemistry is on full display. The director, Jonathan Frakes himself, who was also the director of First Contact, knew how to utilize his castmates' strengths and did so with unashamed aplomb. And I'll give Insurrection one thing, it definitely evokes a mood. Maybe it's just because I'm older and the themes regarding age hit me harder than it did when I was a kid, but I couldn't help but appreciate how happy the film made me feel on my most recent viewing. Insurrection's minimalist storytelling style is quite simply relaxing. While the scene where Picard tries to get Worf to sing a British tar is probably the most memorable moment in the whole movie, there is one scene in particular that always stood out to me, and has only become more poignant as time goes on. This scene is one of those key cinematic moments that helps shape my outlook on life to some small degree. I've talked about Dune in the past, and how some of Frank Herbert's writings have influenced my life, and in much the same way, Insurrection's simple take on the nature of right versus wrong stood out to me, and has stuck with me ever since I first watched it all those years ago. And much of this comes down to the way that Picard is characterized in Insurrection. In Insurrection, Picard is a stoic, charming, and righteous leader, whereas in First Contact, he was a tortured individual haunted by his past assimilation into the Borg. Throughout the course of Insurrection, Picard maintains a constant and resolute sense of morality and duty, which makes for a shallow storytelling experience with little to no character growth. But this fact doesn't fully diminish the moral arguments that the film has to make. During the course of the story, Picard discovers that the Federation is planning on relocating the population of an entire world because the planet has regenerative properties that the Federation wants to study and reproduce. While there's only several hundred of the Baku, the planet's inhabitants, Picard doesn't see it as a simple relocation for the greater good of the Federation. After things come to a head, Picard confronts the Admiral in charge of the secretive operation and says,
"We are betraying the principles upon which the Federation was founded. It's an attack upon its very soul."
Jean-Luc, we're only moving 600 people.
How many people does it take, Admiral, before it becomes wrong? 1,000? 50,000? 1,000,000? How many people does it take, Admiral?
A similar hypothetical situation was posed in the critically panned film Swordfish, which starred John Travolta and Hugh Jackman.
Here's a scenario. You have the power to cure all the world's diseases, but the price for this is that you must kill a single innocent child. Could you kill that child, Stanley?
Nope.
You disappoint me. It's the greatest good.
Well, how about 10 innocents?
Now you're getting it. How about 100? How about 1,000? Not to save the world, but to preserve our way of life.
No man has the right to make that decision. You're no different from any other terrorist.
It always struck me how Jackman's character, much like Picard in Insurrection, was so quick to say no to Gabriel's hypothetical scenario. It struck me because I have to admit that I'm sympathetic to the argument of the greater good. At first glance, it's easy to argue that the side with the greater good wins. After all, focusing on the needs of the majority is a way to minimize damage, or in other words, cause the least amount of impact. Therefore, isn't it the more right thing to do to choose the lesser of two evils?
Do you not know that in the service, one must always choose the lesser of two evils?
In The Wrath of Khan, Spock himself says,
"Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one."
According to Spock's logic, the Admiral's course of action in Insurrection could be seen as completely reasonable and moral. The greater good, aka the Federation as a whole, would stand to gain so much at the expense of the few, or the one. But while that may be the logical approach to any given situation, it's not necessarily the moral one. Picard's stance stands in direct contrast with this notion. To Picard, the needs of the many don't automatically outweigh the needs of the few. Picard's ideology is much more black and white, or dare I say, moralistic.
You see everything in black and white.
No. Not black and white, Ritter.
right and wrong.
We like to talk a lot about democracy, but a democracy, also known as majority rule, is simply law determined by the majority. What the majority believes becomes the accepted morality, all because of the desires of the many. As history repeatedly show us, acting based on the wants and passions of the majority can have devastating consequences.
But why the big secret? People are smart. They can handle it.
A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it.
So is Spock wrong? Well, yes and no. While there must be firm absolutes, admittedly there is also nuance when it comes to matters such as these. To dig a little deeper, in The Wrath of Khan, Spock doesn't sacrifice an innocent child to save the Enterprise. He sacrifices himself, which makes all the difference when it comes to the needs of the many argument. Therefore, Spock is right and wrong. Sacrificing the one for the sake of the many isn't inherently wrong, but it all depends on who is doing the sacrificing and who is making the choice. If you're the one sacrificing your time, resources, or your life for the sake of the many, then that is noble and good. If you're willing to sacrifice someone else without their consent for the sake of the greater good, then that is a separate matter altogether, and those decisions must not be taken lightly. Right now, the argument over abortion has resurfaced in American politics in a big way, and to use Picard's moral code, does abortion become wrong after 1 trimester, 2 trimesters, 3? At what point do we draw the line? When does it become wrong? If something becomes wrong with added time, or because it's affecting a larger portion of the population, does it become wrong, or was it always wrong? Of course, each of us must determine where that line falls for ourselves in any given issue, but what Insurrection asks us to do is to ask and think, and not wait to find out if something is wrong when it might be too late, when the damage has already been unalterably done. Because of this fact, and because the film is simply enjoyable to watch, Insurrection has come to mean a lot more to me over the years. Though it has a simplistic approach to complicated problems, it's not wrong, and sometimes things that are right just need to be said outright. Thanks to the writers and the filmmakers of Insurrection, the scene with Picard and the Admiral helps me to refocus when I'm faced with complicated moral dilemmas. How many people does it take, Admiral, before it becomes wrong? 1,000? 50,000? 1,000,000? How many people does it take, Admiral? Sometimes just asking the question is enough. Thanks for asking, Picard.